December 1994 came to an end. The Mycot Brigade, an armoured force composed of both battle-hardened officers and inexperienced novices, was deployed with a critical objective: to seize Grozny's strategic railway station. Armed with heavy artillery and an arsenal of armoured vehicles, the brigade advanced toward the city, oblivious to the brutal resistance awaiting them. Their mission was a key part of a larger campaign to wrest control of Chechnya's capital, a city whose fate would determine the balance of power in the region. The young soldiers of the Mycot Brigade, many of them fresh recruits, felt a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. They were finally about to see combat. For weeks, they had trained, drilled, and waited. Now, as their armored convoy rumbled toward Grozny, they believed they were marching toward swift victory, unaware of the nightmare that lay ahead. The brigade, split into 2 assault detachments, advanced cautiously into the city. Each detachment was composed of a mechanized infantry battalion, its armored personnel carriers bristling with troops, backed by a formidable contingent of tanks. The plan was simple: push forward, secure key objectives, and establish control. The city was eerily silent, the only sounds coming from the low rumble of engines and the distant whistling of the wind through shattered windows. As the Russian armored column crept forward, the soldiers inside their vehicles shifted uneasily. Something wasn't right. What made it worse was that the city wasn't completely empty. Here and there, lone figures wandered the streets, an old man shuffling aimlessly near a burned-out trolley. Kebab stands still had meat roasting over open flames, yet there were no customers, no voices, no life beyond the occasional ghostly pedestrian. Near the abandoned town square, a lone woman stood at a flower stall, arranging delicate bouquets as if the city wasn't a war zone. It all felt too staged, too unnatural. The city wasn't deserted, it was watching. The first detachment, including Colonel Ivan Savin, reached the railway station without firing a single shot. The eerie silence of Grozny gave them a false sense of security, reinforcing their belief that the operation would be over in mere hours. The second detachment, trailing 15 to 20 minutes behind, was making its way through the city's labyrinth of streets, unaware of the storm about to break. The Russians were confident, too confident. They saw no sign of resistance, no barricades, no ambushes. It felt as if the city had already surrendered. What they didn't know was that their reckless advance had not gone unnoticed. From the shadows, the Chechens watched in disbelief. The enemy had just walked into the lion's den without reconnaissance, without support, without any real understanding of the battlefield. It was a careless, almost suicidal move. But the Chechens weren't about to waste the opportunity. These weren't just disorganized insurgents. They were seasoned fighters, hardened by the brutal war in Abkhazia. They knew urban combat. They knew how to fight an armored enemy. And most importantly, they knew Grozny like the back of their hands. Their weapons caches were overflowing with RPGs, anti-tank missiles, and explosives. Everything they needed to turn the city into a graveyard for Russian armor. Within minutes, a plan was set. Fighters moved into position, setting up kill zones and ambush points. RPG teams took their places in the upper floors of buildings, ready to strike from above. Snipers nestled into hidden vantage points, their sights trained on open streets. The Chechens were about to show the Russians what they had just walked into. The trap was set. Now, they just had to wait. As the minutes passed, tension within the first detachment at the station began to mount. Their radios, once filled with routine check-ins and orders, heard the words "Welcome to Hell" muttered, and then suddenly erupted with the sound of chaos. The second detachment, moving to enter the city behind them, never made it and had been completely annihilated. What had been a confident advance was now a slaughter. The column had been ambushed, its vehicles torn apart in a matter of minutes. Realizing the scale of the attack, Colonel Ivan Sevin immediately called for artillery support. But the strikes were blind. Officers in the field, disoriented and struggling to coordinate, miscalculated positions. Some shells landed too far, others too close. Yet even with all the firepower, the enemy remained elusive. The Chechens weren't fighting a conventional battle. They were ghosts in the rubble. Their tactics were as simple as they were devastating. They never fought in large formations, avoiding direct confrontations with the Russian armor. Instead, they moved in small, highly coordinated groups of 10 to 20 fighters, each unit assigned to its own section of the city. Some were anti-tank teams, riflemen and RPG operators who emerged from alleyways, basements, and hidden rooftops to strike with pinpoint accuracy before vanishing into the ruins. Others were sniper squads, covering major crossroads and intersections. Each marksman assigned a sector, their scope always fixed on the next unsuspecting target. They knew every street, every shortcut, every hidden tunnel that led from one sector to another. As Russian troops struggled to advance, the Chechens shifted like shadows, striking from new angles before slipping away. The city itself had become their weapon. The Russians, trapped in unfamiliar streets and cut off from reinforcements, had stumbled into a carefully laid trap. And now, with their second detachment wiped out and artillery fire falling blindly, the first detachment at the station realized the truth. They weren't just fighting to complete their mission anymore. They were now fighting for their own survival. The first few minutes of the battle had already broken many of the fresh recruits. Some lay face down in the snow, clutching their rifles with trembling hands, refusing to move. The relentless roar of gunfire, the deafening explosions, the screams of the wounded. It was too much. One squad had just witnessed a horror their minds could not process. A soldier, one of their own, had been running to cover when a burst from a sniper rifle took his head clean off. Blood and brain matter sprayed across the frozen ground, his lifeless body collapsing before he even realized he was dead. Some of the men simply froze. They couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. It was like a scene from a war film, except it was real. Across from the railway station stood a 5-story apartment block that the Russians had already nicknamed Pavlov's house, where the Chechens rained destruction upon Colonel Ivan's position. Grenade launchers sent deadly arcs of fire into Russian positions. RPGs would break apart their cover, and small arms fire cut down anyone who dared move in the open. Then just outside, a group of surviving armored personnel carrier crews were fighting for their lives. Their vehicles had taken multiple RPG hits, their armor barely holding. They had emptied every last round from their turrets, their PKMs running red hot from continuous fire. As soon as the first soldier threw open the hatch to exit, a volley of bullets shredded him before he could even hit the ground. One by one, those who tried to escape were mowed down in an instant. The APCs, now nothing more than metal coffins, sat smoking in the street. As if the ambush wasn't bad enough, the Chechens were making logistics a nightmare. They had wedged themselves into Russian radio frequencies, listening in on every communication, jamming signals at critical moments, and even impersonating Russian officers to spread confusion. The Russian forces, already disoriented and under relentless fire, now had to second-guess every command coming through their radios and learn to recognize each other's voices. In one chilling instance, a Russian officer desperately called for a status update on 2 APC commanders who had been sent to reinforce the station. For a moment, the frequency was silent. Then, a voice crackled back, but it wasn't Russian. You instead hear a Chechen on the other end respond, mocking them.
Они не выйдут, потому что сожжены, но я понял, все хорошо.
Shortly after the colonel heard a voice on the radio, one that made his blood run cold. He certainly recognized it. But it wasn't a Russian. It was someone he knew. A voice from another time. A voice from another war.
Алик, давай, может быть, как-нибудь, пока не поздно, отведите ребят, Алик, не делайте это, не делайте, не надо. Ты лучше ко мне как гость приедь, Алик, отводи ребят, не надо, пожалей их матерей, пожалей их самих, отводи ребят, Алик, дай команду.
Ну, я не такой большой начальник, чтобы давать такие команды.
Алик, ну ты правильно пойми, я, например, тебе просто от сердца, да, и чисто желаю, чтобы ты живой, конечно, остался, но уйди лучше.
А я такого выбора не имею. У меня есть приказ, и я его выполню в любом случае.
And the battle raged on. With the Russian position at the train station crumbling, the Chechens changed tactics. Rather than waste more ammunition, they sought to break the Russians psychologically. From the safety of the ruins, Chechen fighters began calling out to the trapped soldiers, urging them to surrender. But the Russians didn't respond. They knew what surrender meant. So, the Chechens attempted to send over civilians instead to convince the Russians to lay down their arms. But most refused. Frustrated, the Chechens chose a different messenger, Lieutenant Vladimir Adonin, a captured Russian officer, bruised and bloodied but still standing. Adonin was given an ultimatum. Tell your comrades to surrender and return, and if you run, we start killing the other prisoners. Adonin had no choice. He marched toward the ruined station where Colonel Savin and his men still held out. When he reached them, the Russian soldiers barely recognized him. His face was gaunt, his uniform torn and stained with blood. "Colonel," he said, voice hoarse, "they want you to surrender." The answer came immediately. "No." Adonin tried again. "They'll kill the prisoners." "They'll kill us anyway," Colonel Savin shot back. "We fight." There was nothing left to say. Adonin turned back toward the Chechen line, walking silently across the tracks. He had done what they asked. When he reached them with a negative answer, the Chechen commander simply nodded to a nearby fighter. A single gunshot echoed through the ruined city, and Lieutenant Adonin crumpled to the ground, dead. There would be no surrender, and the Chechens would show no mercy. At this point, the noose was starting to tighten. Chechens were launching RPGs and machine gun bursts from another house across the tracks, turning Colonel Savin's position at the train station into a shooting gallery. Colonel Savin and his men had nowhere left to go. They were completely surrounded. More than 30 men were already wounded. Ammo was running out, and nearly every APC was destroyed. But the Chechens were still coming. They were just 10 to 15 meters away, now just creeping forward, and any minute now, they would be right on top of their position. On the outskirts of Grozny, the Russian military scrambled to mount a rescue operation for the colonel and his men, still trapped at the train station. Any vehicle that could move was pressed into service. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, and supply trucks. Every able-bodied soldier that could be spared was thrown into the effort. In total, at least 40 vehicles roared to life, kicking up snow and dust as they rumbled toward the city. Officers barked orders, confidence radiating from the ranks, and radioing Ivan that they were on their way. "We go in, clear a path, get our men, and get out. 2 hours, maybe less."
Ребята, подгоняйте, там 40 молодых парней, вы поймите это. Там уже, я не знаю, сколько 200-х, сколько 300-х, они сами посчитать не могут.
They believed overwhelming firepower and numbers would force a breakthrough, but in Grozny, nothing was ever that simple. The convoy entered the ruined city. At first, the streets were quiet. Then, the first RPG streaked down from the rooftops, striking the lead vehicle and turning it into a fireball. More rockets slammed into the convoy, targeting fuel trucks and armored carriers in the tail of the column, trapping them and giving them nowhere left to run. Machine gun fire rained from above, hammering exposed infantry as they scrambled for cover. The rescue force had walked straight into a killing field. And deep within the city, Ivan and his men were still waiting. At the train station, Ivan and his men were running out of time. They had too many wounded men who were dying, with no more medical supplies, and they couldn't afford for them to fail. Their voices crackled through the radio, urgent and desperate.
11-й, блядь. Ну вы думаете, мы все нахуй погибнем. Это не просто так пиздеж, нахуй. Надо конкретная и быстрая помощь, нахуй. Думайте, блядь. Я не могу бросить раненых, нахуй. Техника уже почти вся сожжена, блядь. Думайте, как вывозить и как нас выручать. Прием.
Все силы принимаем, чтобы выручить. Все силы принимаем.
98, ну где эта ленточка, где эта ленточка? Мы даже сейчас вниз опуститься не можем. Жилого сектора тоже ведется огонь. Все. Мы уже здесь в кольце сидим. Где помощь? Срочно помощь нужна. Еще 10-15 минут темнеет. Брат, мы и так тут всех пинаем. У меня специальной ленточкой нет. Мы получили. Вы не бойтесь, сейчас под прикрытием темноты захватите пару чеченских семей. Объявите, что вы взяли за них прикрытием находиться в доме. Нет круговой обороны. Вот такой вариант последний предлагаю. Как понял прием. Понял вас, понял. Но этим, которые здесь, в этом районе находятся, им плохо, все плохо. Чечены, не чечены. Мы им главное. Они на это не пойдут на это. Как вы меня поняли, прием. Стой, ты успокойся, я понимаю твое состояние. Я сам в таком состоянии целый день сегодня. Ты, пожалуйста, успокойся. Под прикрытием темноты можно дойти, здесь не так много. Ползком где-нибудь, перебежками, маленькими группами, прикрывая друг друга. 5 человек ползет, 5 стреляет. У нас 2 300-х, 1 200-й. И нас всего осталось. Нас осталось мало. Плюс у нас еще вооружение с собой, вооружение. Что предлагаешь? У меня некого к тебе послать. Как понял прием. Ну все, мы будем решать сами, сами. Спасибо вам за помощь.
The best thing the rescue column could do now was provide them with artillery support, as they now had their own battle to fight. As the Russian column pressed deeper into the city, it split onto 2 main roads, only to be hit from all sides. Chechen fighters, embedded in every building, unleashed a relentless barrage of RPGs and machine gun fire. Tanks and armored carriers erupted into flames one after another. The streets became a maze of wreckage, burning vehicles and bodies. Crews and infantry, realizing they were sitting ducks, disembarked and scattered. But the streets offered no safety. Some soldiers ran for cover, only to be gunned down by snipers. Others found themselves in dead-end alleyways, trapped like rats. A few lucky ones made it into ruined buildings, holding defensive positions as they waited for friendly forces to link up. They were no longer an organized column. None of the rescue column ever made it to the train station. Despite their firepower, their numbers, and their determination, the city swallowed them whole. Just a block or 2 away from reaching Colonel Savin's position, the remaining vehicles were either destroyed, immobilized, or abandoned. The realization was crushing. No one was coming. Even helicopters came by, attempting to lend support to the trapped men, only leading to frustration as they barely lend any air support.
800-й, вот идут вертушки, ну направьте их к нам, пусть они ниже спустятся, направьте их к нам. Они мимо нас проходят, в 200-300 метров. Стой, то, что ты говоришь мне, они прекрасно тебя слышат, понимаешь? Прекрасно тебя слышат. И дайте их позову, я буду с ними разговаривать. Говорят так же, как со мной. Они все слышат. И все, что думаешь о них, так и скажи. Вертушки, вам от авиации тоже привет. Какая вы чертова авиация? Если вы своих мужиков спасти не можете, вы что, боитесь ниже опуститься, что ли?
Colonel Savin and his men had now been trapped in the train station for 2 days. For 48 hours, they had fought, bled, and died in the frozen ruin of a city. They had no more medical supplies, no more food. Ammunition was dangerously low. No one was coming for them. No one. If they wanted to live, they would have to save themselves. For 2 days, Colonel Savin had obeyed orders. He had held the train station. He had waited for reinforcements. He had trusted that his superiors wouldn't abandon him. But now, it was clear they had. And if he waited any longer, none of them would make it out alive. So instead of waiting for orders, he made his own to leave. It was the only logical, the only sane choice left. Abandon the train station, escape the city, save whoever was still alive. Colonel Savin didn't know if they would make it, but staying meant certain death, and he wasn't about to let Grozny claim them without a fight. Only 3 APCs remained, the last surviving vehicles from the doomed rescue column. Scarred by shrapnel and barely holding together, they were the final chance for evacuation. Positioned not far from the brigade's position, they stood ready to take on the wounded, but reaching them was another matter entirely. Under the cover of night, the remnants of the brigade, including 60 to 70 wounded men, moved in near silence, following the train tracks. Every step was agony, their bodies pushed beyond exhaustion, but the promise of escape kept them moving. Then, just as the APCs came into view, some of the men broke. Shell shock, exhaustion, 2 days of relentless combat and suffering. They collapsed into the snow, too drained to take another step. Some stared blankly ahead, others simply shut their eyes, unable to go on. A political officer, still clinging to his authority, was enraged by the sudden halt. To him, this was unacceptable. They were so close, and now these men, these soldiers, were giving up. Desperate to motivate them, he raised his voice. "To the ones who go first, I promise 2 medals when we leave." The words hung in the frigid air. The men looked at each other in disbelief. Medals? After everything? After being abandoned? After dragging their wounded through hell? One soldier snapped. Without warning, he stood up, ripped a detached AK grenade launcher from his gear, and smashed it across the officer's face. The blow sent the officer sprawling into the snow. The soldier pounced, beating him savagely. "You bastard! We're spilling blood here!" he roared, striking him again and again. The officer, stunned and bleeding, threw up his hands in surrender. "Stop! Stop! I'll walk on my own," he gasped. The soldier stepped back, breathing heavily, then turned away. No one spoke. There was no discipline left. No ranks, no politics, only survival. Without another word, the men picked up their wounded and kept moving. The APCs were waiting, and if they didn't reach them now, they never would. The wounded and exhausted soldiers climbed aboard the last 3 APCs, their final chance at escaping the city. Engines roared to life, and with a lurch, the armored vehicles began their desperate retreat. For a brief moment, it felt like they might actually make it. But in Grozny, once you entered, there was little hope of getting out. The first 2 APCs pushed forward, weaving through the wreckage-strewn streets, while the third lagged behind, struggling to keep pace. And that's when the Chechens caught up with them. The first 2 APCs managed to push through the city's edge, but the last one fell behind, lost in the maze of narrow streets. That delay would cost them everything. As they moved through the war-torn blocks, Chechen fighters closed in. The retreat turned into a trap. One APC was hit by 3 RPGs from multiple angles, tearing through its armor and instantly killing most of the men inside. The blast threw off the 40 soldiers crammed inside and riding on top, scattering bodies across the street. The other 2 fared no better, wiped out in similar fashion, cut down in a rain of fire before they even saw who hit them. Any survivors were killed or captured as prisoners. Out of the prisoners, any that were Muslim were executed and seen by the Chechens as traitors. The Mycot Brigade, once 1,000 strong, was annihilated. By the end of the battle, only 160 men survived. Another 75 were captured by the Chechens. The rest, dead. The train station, the city streets, and the burning hulks of armored vehicles became their graves. What exactly happened to Colonel Savin in those final hours remains uncertain. His body was found after the battle. The men who had been with him said he was killed by a burst of shrapnel, likely from a grenade. He had done everything he could to save what was left of his brigade. He had fought, he had led, and in the end, he had managed to get some of his men out, but at the cost of his own life. One of the Russian prisoners later recalled his time in Chechen captivity. He was interrogated, but to his surprise, he was treated fairly. The Chechens didn't beat him, didn't torture him. Instead, they talked. It was during one of these conversations that he learned something chilling. Among the Chechen fighters was a former Soviet officer, a major, once the chief of counterintelligence, a man who had served 14 years in the Soviet army fighting in Afghanistan. Perhaps, the prisoner thought, this was the same man who had spoken to the Colonel Savin over the radio. The irony was as brutal as the battle itself. It was later learned that the two men had known each other for years. They had fought side by side as brothers in arms from the Soviet-Afghan War. But this war, the one that pulled them into Grozny, didn't care for their history or friendship. It swallowed them both. Eventually, Grozny fell, taken by Russian forces in the months that followed. But the cost to the Mycot Brigade was staggering. What unfolded there became one of the most catastrophic military blunders in modern Russian history, and a brutal lesson in the chaos of urban warfare. The assault on Grozny exposed deep flaws in strategy, coordination, and doctrine. It wasn't just a defeat on the ground, it was a wake-up call, and the US military took notice. Analysts and strategists pored over the battle, studying every misstep, every ambush, every shattered convoy. When American forces entered Baghdad nearly a decade later, the hard lessons of Grozny helped shape their tactics, changing how modern armies fight in cities forever. Thanks for sticking with me until the end here, and I hope you guys liked this one. This was definitely one of the most interesting military stories I've researched in quite a while. I know that not every single part of this might be 100% accurate, as there is still a lot of varying accounts of what happened without clear enough details. Honestly, this story kind of seemed like the Russian version of Black Hawk Down, except everything that could go wrong absolutely did. If you guys have any specific stories you'd like me to cover, please sound off in the comments below. I have many more of these currently in the works, so stay tuned and subscribe. Also, if you could do me a huge favor, just click the like button. It helps get this video out to more people, which will make it easier for me to continue making more videos like this.